having received his first vision of Jesus Christ himself, in the one like a Son of Man, John now addresses the 7 churches that have been referenced up to this point. But in addressing the 7 churches, one has to remember the symbolic nature of the number 7, which is the symbol of perfection, or the fullness of perfection. So while John is addressing these 7 particular churches, the book of Revelation is in fact addressing the fullness of the church, the entire church. So John is writing and speaking for the entire church. And the messages show John's familiarity with each church and their situation. These churches are in communities such as Ephesus. We're familiar with Ephesus as one of the letters of St. Paul, and even some of the early fathers of the church, such as Ignatius of Antioch, have written letters to Ephesus. Ephesus was the capital city of that region, so a very important city that is being addressed by John in this revelation. Another city is Smyrna. Smyrna was a very famous city, considered among the loveliest cities. Ironically, this famous and lovely city receives the shortest of the 7 letters to the churches. Third, we have Pergamum. Pergamum was the former capital city of the region, and thus is still considered to be among the greatest and most famous of cities, perhaps the same way as New York City is to the United States, once a capital in which George Washington held his administration, but is now no longer the capital city of the United States, but still a great and very famous city in the world. Pergamum is that type of a city. Fourth, Thyatira was considered the least important city in this province. And yet, this least important city receives the longest of the letters. The exact opposite of Smyrna, a famous city that receives the shortest letter. Thyatira is the least important of the cities and receives the longest of these 7 letters to the churches. Sardis is the oldest and most decayed of the cities in which we find these 7 churches. It's considered a place of degradation. While on the other hand, the city of Philadelphia is the youngest of the cities. It had a history, but it was destroyed by an earthquake in AD 70. Philadelphia had since been rebuilt, and so there's a newness and a freshness to this city, named Philadelphia, which, quite obviously, a city in the United States, has been named for this city in Asia Minor that received a message from John in the book of Revelation. Finally, we have the city of Laodicea and the church in Laodicea, a very wealthy commercial center, but has the distinction of being the city that is rejected in the book of Revelation. It's criticized for being neither hot nor cold, but lukewarm. Therefore, Laodicea will be spit out of the mouth of God. So it receives among the harshest of those 7 letters. However, in the promise at the end of those letters, it is being given the greatest promise, that if they overcome this degradation, then they will no longer be rejected and be among the closest of the communities to God. So while it is a city of degradation and is rejected, it is given the greatest of the promises featured at the end of these letters. And so these characteristics of the letters, in some ways, perhaps for the people of that time, reflect these characteristics of the cities. Thyatira receives the longest letter, even though it's the least among the cities addressed. Smyrna receives the shortest letter, even though it's considered among the greatest of the cities. Laodicea receives the harshest letter, but receives the greatest promise at the end. And so we'll see characteristics like this throughout these 7 letters. And the issues and pattern of those letters will be addressed in the next video as we look at the message that John sends to these 7 churches. And as they are 7, John is in fact sending them to the entire church.